Blog Talk Radio.
The following broadcast is brought to you by the iGolf Sports Network.
Golf Talk Live is sponsored by the iGolf Sports Network and Golf Tips Magazine. Here's Andrew to tell you more about our sponsors.
iGolf Sports is a live stream broadcast and media production company providing quality programming designed to attract the golfing enthusiast. And Golf Tips, the game's most in-depth instruction magazine, including reviews on the latest equipment, tips from top teaching professionals, all designed to help you improve from tee to green. Welcome to Golf Talk Live with your host, Ted Odorico. Join Ted each week as he speaks with some of the best in golf. This week's special guest will join us a bit later. But first up is another great discussion on Coach's Corner. So let's introduce tonight's Coach's Corner panel.
All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Golf Talk Live. I'm your host, Ted Odorico, and we've got a great show for you tonight, as always. We're going to start things off here in just a moment with another great panel discussion on the Coach's Corner panel, and then a little bit later on, I'm going to be joined by the CEO of Power Tee, Martin Wyeth. He's going to be joining me on the second half of the program. Looking forward to that interview, but as I said, we're going to start off here in just a moment with another great discussion on Coach's Corner. But first, let me just remind everybody, of course, we are live every Thursday evening from 6 to 8 p.m. Central here on the blogtalkradio.com network. And for some reason, if you're one of those that's not always able to join us during the live broadcast, you can just visit the link blogtalkradio.com/golftalklive, and you can just scroll down to the on-demand section, and you can see all of the previously aired programs in their entirety, or you can visit wherever any great podcast, whether it be iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and many others, which will be listed at the end of the show, so you'll hear more about that. But we want to thank all those tuning in. And just also a side note, next week there will be no shows. There will not be a Golf Talk Live or Women of Golf on Tuesday. I'll be heading off to Las Vegas for a brief holiday, so I'm going to be out of the area and taking a little break, a little summer vacation, as it will, and hopefully I won't have to hitchhike coming home, but we'll see what happens out there in the casinos. But anyways, great discussion tonight on the Coach's Corner panel, and let me introduce the gang that's going to be joining me tonight, and then we'll get into this evening's discussion. First up is Jamie Leno-Zimron. She's a Class A LPGA teacher professional and a 6th degree Aikido black belt. She's also a somatic psychologist and a corporate speaker and a mind-body fitness trainer. She graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Stanford University, and she's also the creator of TI Golf, The Centered Way. Also on the panel is Jim Endicott. He's been with us now this year for a number of times, and he's been teaching this great game for about 38 years. He's a former Golf Digest School's general manager and a 7-time PGA Award winner, including most recently the 2022 North Florida PGA Section Patriot Award and 2 North Florida PGA Youth Development Awards. And currently he is the Director of Instruction at the Royal St. Cloud Golf Links in St. Cloud, Florida. So please welcome Jim and Jamie to the Coach's Corner panel. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us. Thank you very much, Ted. And nice to be with you, Jim.
Yes, it's great to be with you, Jamie. And Ted, as always, thank you so much for having me on.
Not a problem. All right, so we're going to talk about some trouble shots, or even you might even want to call these recovery shots. Now, these are shots that, unfortunately, every once in a while, of course, as we know, golf is not a perfect game, and we all kind of make mistakes from time to time and are forced to get a little creative to escape some of those bad situations. So we're going to talk about those, and we've just got a few of them, but we're going to sort of approach it from a little bit different standpoint than what I normally do here. So one of the things that I want to do, and Jamie, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to do it in the order that I introduced you. So we're going to talk about, first off, how to play out of the rough. And this is probably a fairly mild recovery shot, getting out of the rough. And some might even say it isn't really a recovery shot unless you sort of intentionally hit your drive into the rough. So, but we'll need to make some sort of a recovery here. So I want to really approach this from a couple of ways. I want you to give an example, and you can pick whatever yardage you want. That's fine, just for the purpose of the example. But I want you to talk about maybe a couple of scenarios. So if the ball is a little deeper in the rough, there might be some specific things that you need to in your setup and how you approach that shot. as opposed to if it's not necessarily deep in the rough, but still in the rough, but maybe sitting up a little bit or what have you. So give us a couple of scenarios. Talk about what we need to do in order to get ourselves back in play.
Well, first of all, let me just say I'm excited about this topic. I didn't know this was going to be it, but I actually teach whole trouble shots golf schools because I think it's so important to be able to recover and not lose too many shots, right? So so I'm just happy with the topic. Thank you, Ted. In terms of hitting out of the rough, the first thing is that, you've got to look at the kind of grass it is, and also are you in the first cut of rough, or are you deeper into the rough? So, what's the length of the rough is obviously, a factor. If you're, so I think if you're just in the kind of, first cut of rough, I don't stress too much about that. A lot of times I think that it's helpful for sort of your average golfer and more than average golfer to perhaps take a hybrid club and then just swing it pretty normally. And, be sure to get through the grass is important. The longer grass, the rough, tends to grab the club head and sort of slow it down. And it will, oftentimes, it can take some yardage off. On the other hand, it can also cause what we call flyers, which means that the ball will just shoot out and it'll just run. So it's hard to hold the ball, for example, on the green. And sometimes you'll find with a hybrid hitting out of the rough that, you can hit a pretty decent shot and it will have some extra run on it. So that often happens as well. I think that, when the ball's deep in the rough, we'll take that scenario. And let's say, you got a shot that you could ordinarily get to the green, maybe 150 yards, 175 yards. I think first you just need to know that, the grass could really slow you down. And so you've got to be sure that you've got a strong stance or, a good balance, a lot of stability, and to, kind of give it a little more, right? Sometimes you'll see the pros just like, whoa, you can see where their fitness comes in. You kind of need some muscles to do that, to get through the grass. But a lot of times you'll want to just play smart. It's course management and take a club, like a shorter club, sometimes even an 8-iron, a 7-iron, to be sure you get out well and hit it to a distance. Don't be greedy. Don't try to get to the green necessarily if it's a really long or buried lie. Important to stay with the shot, to really be sure you kind of get through, sometimes to hit down on it, and in that way to not just have the club so grabbed by the grass, and to kind of hitting down will help to pop it up and get it out of the grass. You can't really sweep through when it's deeply buried. So I think you really got to look over your lie and look over your distance and use course management. The old phrase, take your medicine at times. And so, it's thinking, you can't necessarily get to the green, or maybe you're a little bit closer, but you can't hold the green because, you just can't get much spin on the ball, or, you can't get necessarily the same height on it. And so sometimes it's just wise to play a shot that can get you to a decent yardage that you can hit, a good wedge and hopefully maybe one putt and, kind of save the shot there, or be happy you got, have it be a good bogey kind of thing. So those are just some starting thoughts.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, Jamie, great points, by the way. Obviously, assessing the situation first and foremost, to decide what's realistic, what your expectations are, whether they're realistic or not. If you're a high handicap player, and let's say, taking your scenario somewhere between 150 and 175 yards in that range, if you're not really a strong player, and I don't necessarily mean physically strong, but a accomplished player, maybe sometimes, depending on how deep the ball is, getting just out to a better yardage, as you pointed out, might be the smarter play, instead of trying to whiff it, down the fairway 175 or down the hole 175 yards, and then running the risk of making it work differently. The other thing I wanted to ask you, and I know you kind of touched on this, but I just want to get a little more specific. Typically when the ball is in the fairway, your angle is a sort of a shallower one when you're striking the golf ball, whereas if you're in a deeper rough, let's say, you might take a steeper angle attack. And are there some other points that you might want to consider as far as ball position, that sort of thing. Is some other things to keep in mind?
Well, again, you've got to kind of look at what you've got. And when you say steep, I would say you also have to think about a little steeper takeaway, because you don't want the club to get stuck in the grass with sort of a wide sweeping takeaway. And that will also facilitate that steeper, angle attack, or what we call hitting down on the ball, to help it have some loft. Ball position. I tend personally to play it more, well, it depends. I'll kind of play it more middle back, just because I don't want to get stuck in the grass. On the other hand, if you play it a little bit forward, it helps it helps the ball to get some loft. But I tend to play, kind of middle of the road. But and it can also depend as well. Sometimes when you're in the rough, you're also more side hill, and you could be uphill or downhill in the rough, which adds a little more complexity to things. I think the key factors are really around staying stable and being sure that you have some oomph on the ball, on your swing. Being aware that the grass is going to slow the club head down, and so it's really not a time to decelerate or to lose your balance. And those are two common problems that kind of ordinary golfers have. All golfers have, actually. Well, maybe not pros, but even then. But it's the decel thing, and that can happen even to good players. It's like you think you're doing fine, and all of a sudden you get to the ball and your club just it slows down. It gets grabbed, and sometimes it can be really surprising what that long grass can do to you. So it's so important to have a lot of stability and balance, and to really kind of hold on to the club, hold on to your stance, and get through the ball.
Well said. And I imagine a lot of pros that have played at the U.S. Open over the years, obviously having experienced some deep rough, can probably concur with a lot of what you just said. But, you really have to assess your situation.
At Torrey Pines, which is famous for really long rough during Opens, at the U.S. Open, I actually saw a few pros, including Phil Mickelson, literally duff a shot. I mean, duff it, just barely roll it up through the grass. So, it can happen. It can happen to the best of them.
Yep. That's right. Jim, I'm going to come to you on this one here. This is a little different. This is one, again, depending on where you're playing, can be a frequent problem for a lot of golfers, especially our high handicap, and that's how to play from the woods. So you've hit your ball into the woods a little bit. You've got some trees and other things to deal with. Walk us through some scenarios here, and what are some options? What are we looking at? Obviously, we need to assess what's going on, but give us your thought process on what you're going to guide your student. And again, if you want to give a specific example just for the purpose of demonstration, feel free to do so. But what do we got to do here? We've got hit the ball into the woods. What are some of our options?
Well, when we find ourselves in the woods, I often see players go in there and they have a look and they say, well, if I can get it between those two trees that are about 10 yards in front of me, and those two trees are about 10 feet apart, I might be able to squeak this thing up onto the green. And I always ask that player before they do that, you just hit it into the woods and you missed a fairway that was 40 yards wide, and now you're thinking of going through something that's 10 feet wide. We might want to make a different choice. And so we have to first take a look at, one, how far are we to where we want to go? How far are we to the green? And then we make a decision on where do we want to end up after we've hit this. And with that decision, we want to look at what's the safest direction to go that gives me the widest target to go through to get back into the fairway. My father told me when I was very young, when you hit into trouble, the woods, or deep rough, as Jamie was talking about, get out of that situation in one hit. And so most often when we're in the trees, we have to now hit a shot that's lower than normal. And when we take a look at the types of shots that are lower than normal, we have a chip shot, and we have a putt. And so if I'm in the woods, and perhaps I've played golf courses where there's pine needles throughout the woods, and there's not much rough, you could actually find that you could putt that thing out of there and get it back onto the fairway. Again, just trying to get it so that our next hit, I can hit a good one. But if I'm needing to hit a little bit further, I would use the technique that I would call a chipping technique. And so what we would do is adjust the ball. Let's take a 7-iron that has limited loft, and we set up as if we were hitting our normal fairway shot. Then we'd maybe narrow our stance slightly and put a bit of weight towards our lead foot. And this allows for that club to go a little bit more up and down, missing some of the uncertainty that may be behind my golf ball in the woods. But it also, by leaning that way, it also takes a little more loft off of the golf club, which would then make that ball go a little bit lower. And so I would play the chipping technique to a yardage that I know, one, I can get to, and two, that it's reasonable for me to have a good shot into the green. So the club choice needs to be based on what's between me and that target. Do I need to fly it 5 feet in the air, 10 feet in the air? Do I need to keep it lower? That's going to influence which club I choose. I could chip it out of there with a 9-iron if I could let it fly, say, maybe 10 or 15 feet in the air. So the club choice is on what am I negotiating between me and my target, what trajectory works for me. I would play the chipping technique with that club I chose to go the distance I want to go. But very, very important that when we are making our decision of what to play, we have to make it based on it's a safe area to hit. It's not putting a premium to try and go through this 5-foot wide opening. Let's go through something that's 25 feet wide and get it back into play. The other thing to take a look at, depending on the type of trees and situation we're in and your skill set, sometimes you can look up and you can go through an opening between the trees. You could take something with more loft and play it up there. Again, we got to check our skill set to say, is that something I can do?
Some very good points. And I think it goes down to, what I was saying earlier. You pointed out with skill set, but you also have to factor in the percentage of success that you're going to have. I mean, obviously there are always a lot of variables in there and things can change, but if you're, as you pointed out, if you're having difficulty keeping it when the fairway is 40 yards wide and now you're trying to hit through a 10-foot slot, the likelihood of you being successful with that based on past performance is not very likely. So, again, you have to look at it from a percentage standpoint. What is the percentage or likelihood that I'm going to recover from this going, with option A as opposed to option B? If option A is maybe 30, 40, even 50% chance, but option B is more like 70 or even 80% chance, even though it might not advance me as far down the fairway as I'd like, that's a higher percentage of likelihood of success. And I think that's where a lot of amateurs, as you were sort of alluding to, fall into that trap, is they look at it and they think, okay, I can just thread it through that little hole there and I'm going to be back in the fairway or I'm going to be down towards the green and can set up, and that might not be the best shot for them. So there are a lot of factors obviously going into this, but we're just trying to give the listeners just a little bit of a guidance on what to consider and what options are available. And I like yours too. Putting is a great option if, unless you're deep in the woods, and if that's the case, getting it out in any way, shape, or form is the best option, just getting it back out to the fairway. But, if putting is an option, if there's not a lot of obstacles there and it's a fairly, decent path to get back out to the fairway, pull out your putter, and putting, or like you said, a chipping stroke is sometimes the most, easiest way to get back in play. And I like that. Some great options there. Thank you for that, Jim. Jamie, I'm going to come back to you on this one here. And this is another one that a lot of people find themselves at some point, usually at least once or sometimes twice in a round, maybe even more, depending on where you're playing. But you might find yourself, your ball's rolled up and it's on some hard pan, and you've got to play that ball. This is something that a lot of people are a little squeamish about because they know that the ground is hard and firm, and it might even hurt if they're not doing it. So what are some options here to do if we find our ball sitting in an area that would be considered hard pan?
I think the first thing is to not get what I call off-centered mentally. And what I mean is that, you look at your ball, it's on hard pan, you're like, oh, bad news, and a feeling like you just can't do it. And I personally find that hard pan is not that difficult. If you just kind of stay with the shot, I find that a hybrid works well, a lot of times an 8 or 9 iron, 7 iron, and you can, hit that shot pretty darn well. I don't find that there's particularly a technique to, and maybe it's just a technique I don't know about so well, but for me, it's all about just keeping clear and not thinking that this is a terrible situation to be in. If I'm in pine needles, that's actually a little bit trickier, but that's another story. Hard pan itself, I think you have to be ready to maybe feel braced a little bit because it's a little bit hard sometimes when the club comes down. But again, every trouble shot, I think, is an opportunity to improve all of our shots because sometimes people hit better shots when they're in trouble situations for the reason that consciously or not, they keep their balance better. They have more stability. They have a stronger base. They don't tend to sway or lift around so much. They just kind of like, oh, here I am, boom, I'm going to hit this shot. And incredibly enough, they sometimes hit better shots in trouble situations, and that's really the reason for it. So, again, I think it's just to not get freaked out mentally and think, oh, this is so hard, this is terrible. Just go up there and go, okay, this is nothing. Just, make a swing, be prepared for maybe a little jarring there, and go ahead and hit the shot.
And what about things like
can I tell a little joke?
Yeah, go ahead, sorry. Sure.
It's one of my favorite. It's just a cute little golf joke. So there were these two guys, buddies, they're playing a match and they're riding the same cart. And so the one of them hits a shot and it ends up kind of half in the grass and half on the cart path. So they get up there and they have this whole kind of discussion, argument about it. The one guy says, I get relief, it's on the cart path. The other guy goes, no, it's in the grass. You can't move it. And so finally the guy agrees. He goes, okay. So, he goes, he grabs a club and he swings and it like kind of scrapes through the cart path and then it just swishes beautifully through the grass and the ball goes flying and it bounces up on the green beautifully. It's just a beautiful, high, nice shot and it goes to tap in distance and his buddy says to him, oh my God, what'd you hit? And his friend says, your 7 iron. Yeah, you didn't want to give me relief. That. All right. Yeah. But anyways, that's just, and actually if you think about that situation, it's like, okay, my ball's kind of half and half, and the guy just really just made a swing right through it, and he didn't go, oh man, half of it's here, half of it's there, or it's hard pan, it's not. He just made a swing, nice, beautiful shot, took off.
Yeah, and sometimes too, I think, Jamie, that, it depends on the circuit. If you're just out having fun with your friends and things like that, it's not necessarily a serious game of golf, you can be a little bit more relaxed and not. Obviously, if you're playing in a tournament of something, then you want to be a little bit more conscious of what you do. And I think there's a couple of factors, too, that I look at, depending on the severity. Again, I might want to look at moving the ball a little bit back in my stance because obviously I know it's hitting off hard pan. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, so I would rather make sure I make good contact with the ball first. And then the other thing, too, is really developing good tempo through the swing. A lot of times people, when they get in a situation that they're nervous and they rush through the process and end up making a worse shot when maybe just slowing it down. Instead of trying to hit it 100%, maybe just slow it down to 80% of what you would normally, or even 75%, and just make sure that your tempo and timing is in good order so that you are making as best contact as possible with the golf ball. And I think if you factor in some of those as well,
I think that's that's a great.
Go ahead.
That's a great way of saying it, which is to keep your time and your tempo, your rhythm. Don't feel like you've got to do something special. And like you mentioned, the nervousness can really throw people off. And that's what I was saying, kind of mentally right off the bat, getting nervous and thinking, oh, this is a bad situation. It's really not such a terrible situation. And keeping that kind of center, that balance, and well said in terms of the time and the tempo, the rhythm, just, make a good swing through there. It's also, of course, important, as in any shot, not to decelerate, which can happen out of fear of the kind of impact on the hard pan, and just, once again, to kind of get through the ball, but without rushing through it. And I would really agree with that. The other thing that I would say is that it's important on every shot that we're talking about to practice it. You don't want to be in a situation on the golf course, and this is kind of like the first time or maybe sort of the second time that you've ever been here. It sounds kind of funny, but, and we can talk about this more, this is what I do in trouble school, is that we purposely put ourselves in these situations or in your own personal practice. Don't just always practice the good lies. You want to put yourself in these situations, because once you've had even a little experience, it gives you so much more confidence that you can actually execute the shot when you need to.
Yeah, that's a great point. Growing up, my father did that. He obviously taught me this game. He was not certainly a teacher professional, but he was a very good golfer. And when we would go to the range, he wouldn't go to the nice teeing area. He would go to the area that had been roughed up a little bit by some of the earlier folks practicing, and I would hit out of everything from divots to if it was a hard section, and he would do that. And he would say, you're not going to get off a perfect lie here on the practice area, because you're not going to, always have that out in the golf course. So I want you to be prepared. So, I didn't as a kid, I didn't really like it that much because it didn't seem as much fun, but it paid off over the years. But again, that point was that he wanted me to understand and practice working on some of these difficult shots. So a great point to bring up as well. Jim, I'm going to come back to you on this one here, and I'm going to actually skip this one here because Jamie kind of talked a little bit. It was about talking about hitting off a cart path. I'm sure there's a lot of things that we would consider here, but I want to give you this one here. I think this is a fun one, is how to hit a shot when the golf ball is partially submerged in water. Maybe you've got a situation where it could be a wet area. It might be not necessarily a deep pond, but maybe on the edge of the pond, and you want to hit it out. I mean, obviously there are a lot of factors involved, but what do we got to do here? It's partially submerged. You can see it, and we know there's going to be a few people on the course that are going to, make an effort to try and get it out. So for the sake of those that do want to try that shot, what would be some options?
Well, the first thing we have to look at is the key to getting that one out is to get to the bottom of the golf ball. In order to get to the bottom of the golf ball, we have to have an angle of approach that is descending in nature as it approaches it. So going back to what we talked about in the woods, and I said the chipping technique, we needed to lean a little bit towards the target, which would deepen the angle of approach. The other thing we need to look at is that ball needs to have some loft. That shot has to have some loft to get it up and out of there. And we need to choose a club with plenty of loft. But I wouldn't necessarily choose one that had a whole lot of bounce to it, because that's going to, much like Gene Ferrison, when he developed the sand wedge, he saw a duck landing on a pond and how it skidded across the water. We don't want to skid across the water here. We want to go downward. So that angle of approach is going to help us, and having something with less bounce on it. So it might be your 60-degree wedge that has limited bounce on it to get down to it. And then we're going to give it a pretty good go at it. We're going to hinge it up in the backswing with some wrist action, and we're going to thump that club head straight down to the bottom of the golf ball. And you probably aren't going to have a whole lot of follow-through because your energy is headed downward to get to the bottom of the golf ball. And the key here is, I called it thumping down. It's throwing the club head to the bottom of the golf ball. So often when we try to give it a go to get something out of a deep situation, as Jamie talked about in the deep rough, this isn't a whole lot different than playing out of the deep rough. We want to be sure we're throwing the club head, and all too often we see players take and they drag the handle and change their posture to try to get down to the bottom of the ball. But it's better to have some wrist action, a hinging of the wrist, and using that hinge and unhinging it to throw the club head down to the bottom of the golf ball. Don't worry too much with a lot of follow through because your energy is going downward. And make sure if you have only one foot in the water, make sure you take the right shoe off. Don't take the left foot shoe off and have your right foot in the water.
Well said. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely not a shot for everybody, and I don't recommend that everybody necessarily try it. If you're a more skilled player and you manage to practice this a little bit over the years, you might want to consider doing that. Sometimes it's just better to take your punishment and try to get away with maybe a bogey or what have you, because it can multiply very quickly if you don't understand the proper techniques to do that. And it's a hit and miss. You can set up perfectly for it, but as you said, if you don't get to the bottom of the ball and you just end up making a big splash, the only thing you're going to come away with was some wet clothes and possibly even worse if there's a little mud underneath your foot and you slip and get in a little bit wetter. It's not a fun shot to have to do. Jamie, I'm going to come back to something, and it kind of falls under, I guess, the thicker rough category a little bit, but there's, I guess, some different options that are available. I think everybody's pretty set on hitting out your typical bunker shot, but on some golf courses now we see where it looks like a bunker. There's no sand, but it's a thick grass, and it looks just like a bunker, and sometimes the ball could be down the middle, sometimes it could be kind of in the, near the top and that. How are we going to typically play a shot like this? Do we play it like a bunker shot, or what are some of our options here? So if you've got sort of like a pot bunker, but it's not filled with sand, it's just some maybe thick grass, maybe it's near the green or what have you. How would we play a shot like that? What would we be looking to do if we were in that situation?
These are great questions and great shots to practice. I'm trying to picture exactly what you're talking about here, but because there are, I think I got you, sort of like a depression area, and it's it's not hard pan. It's that thick kind of there's thick grass in there, and that can really depend on your lie. There's also another one. I don't know if you're going to ask about this one, but where you almost have this like fescue stuff growing up around the edges, say, of a bunker. That's another whole story. These like long reeds, fescue stuff. But I don't think that's what you're asking about. That's just kind of long grass. Sometimes your ball can be kind of sitting up in it. In a sense, it doesn't feel like it's buried, doesn't look or feel like it's buried. And you feel, and if it's not a long shot, say green side, I think you can take, maybe a 56 or even a 60, but 56 wedge, something like that. Again, kind of hinging it and somewhat of a flop shot, the face of the club open and, a ball a little bit forward in your stance so that you're going to hit it on the upswing and be able to loft it up out of there. Again, you have to give it some oomph. All of these shots, you can't be too faint-hearted. It doesn't mean that you go fast. Tempo is still really important, but it means that you have the acceleration. I always stay a little bit away from the word acceleration because it sounds like you go fast. But for me, what it means is that you're sure that you're coming through. So let's say it's a 50 back swing, 50 forward swing. It'd be more like, and this is pretty true on every shot, say 45 back, 55 coming through. That's acceleration. You're sure that you're coming through the ball, okay? So, and again, it depends on the distance that you've got to go. If it's, say you got 80, 100, 125 yards, you can take for me, a wedge, a 9-iron, an 8-iron feels like I've got a solid iron, a solid club that can get me through that grass, and that has some loft. If the ball is buried in that deep grass, that's going to be a little bit more difficult. And again, we were talking about, needing to hinge and to hit down, get to the bottom of the ball so that it will pop up. And that's always an interesting experience that I think is fun to practice and teach yourself. It's sort of counterintuitive that when you hit down on the ball, it will pop itself up. So sometimes you can kind of close the face of the club, hit down on it, and it will pop itself up. Sometimes you need to open the face of the club. The counterintuitive is the one where you close the face of the club, hit down, boom, and it comes up. The other one is more of an open face club where you feel like you can kind of hinge and then sweep through and then sort of loft the ball up like as in a pitch shot. So a lot, it depends. Sometimes in those bunkers, it depends where you are in them. You can be kind of barely in, so you're on the down slope, and it's complicated with a bit of a downhill. Sometimes it's kind of bounced and rolled, so you're a little bit more on the uphill. I think it's easier to play the uphill ones. When you're a little on the uphill, it tends to be in a bunker or anywhere when you've got that sort of downhill that it's harder to get the club to come down behind the ball in such a way to loft it. So, again, these things take practice, and I think some experimentation. A lot of people have a special club that's more of a go-to club for them, that they feel comfortable in those situations. And I like what Jim said, or your dad, that you want to get out of trouble in one shot. That's your goal. You can't get too greedy. If you can get back and play, again, depending on the situation, and do that in one shot, and then, and continue on, that's recovery.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and I believe it was your dad, Jim, that you mentioned that said that to focus on getting it out in one shot. And I think the other thing too is there's so many different, Jim. There's so many different scenarios that we could create, but I think there's one sort of underlying issue, and that is really sort of going through an assessment checklist. So if you were to put, for any shot really, but if you were to put together a short checklist, maybe 3 points, maybe 4 points that every golfer should do whenever they're faced with a different scenario, whatever it may be, whether it be one of the ones we've talked about or maybe some that we haven't, what would that checklist look like? As they walk up to their ball and they are assessing the situation, what's that sort of quick checklist, mental checklist that they should be going through to help make their decision and before they make that decision? What would be that checklist?
Well, I think the very first thing you have to do is look at where the ball's sitting. You have to understand what are the ingredients around it. We've talked about deep grass. Jamie talked about fescue. We've talked about hard pan, pine needles, out of the water. We have to look at that situation, and what does that situation require of us to make solid contact to the golf ball? Once we've determined that, we need to then look at how far do I need to go? How far is the flag? And from that information, we can determine whether or not the lie fits my ability to move the ball as far as the flag is. And if that's the case, then I work my plan accordingly. However, if I look at it and say, you know what, it's 200 yards to that flag, and my best hit's going to go 175. It's going to be 2 hits now. So I'm going to make a decision based on that. If I look at the lie, I look at how far am I going to go, what do I need to negotiate between me and that target? And let's say, what is my target? Like I just said, my max shot is 175. I might be hitting a 100-yard shot. Now, what am I going to do to negotiate to get there? I got to hit it low, or I have to hit it high. I have to hit it, allow it to roll. It's uphill, it's downhill. I take those bits of information and kind of compute it. But to keep it as simple as possible, look at the lie. What does it allow me to do? Where do I want to hit it to? How far do I want to hit this golf ball? Do I have to hit it high or low? And then I make the plan of action to accomplish that task. And if you're always looking at your shot to say, how do I move it from this situation to a better situation? And I think what happens with a lot of players is they look at their situation and they try to move it to the best situation. Example, I'm in the trees, but I still want to try to make par or birdie. Well, that may not be the best situation. It may be the best situation to move this thing 50 yards down the fairway, and now let's go on from there. Because when we try to go to that max and best, sometimes that causes us to, one, have performance anxiety. We don't perform as well as we'd like, and we rattle it around in the trees a few times, and we make a 9 instead of a 6. So I kind of got a little off there, but let's come back to it and say we look at the lie, we look at where we want to go to, and we make our plan to get there.
Yeah, and I think also, too, you know, and this is obviously going to happen, sometimes the decision you make still does not get pulled off the way you had hoped, and you find yourself in a similar or even maybe even worse situation. And I would imagine what you would want to do at that point, Jim, is to basically rinse and repeat. So go through the same process again. Would that be correct? If you didn't get out of the trouble and you made the situation the same or worse, you want to go through that whole process again, correct?
Absolutely. And if we just look at the objective of golf, the objective of golf is to hit a golf ball a certain distance at a target. And if we always boil it down to that, make sure that our target is one that I can get to, one that is safe if I don't hit my perfect one, and then let's move it to that. So every single shot we play in golf is we hit at a certain distance at a target. Not maximum distance necessarily, but a certain distance. And if you always take your plan to say, I'm going to hit my ball to a better place than it is right now. And that better place might be hitting it out of the deep rough over 10 feet into the fairway. How do I get it to a better place than I am right now, giving me a chance to be successful on my next hit?
Well said. There's always, it always goes back to this, and I always, we've talked about this so many times on the show over the years. It really goes down to understanding and being realistic, about your own personal ability. Too often we see students going out there playing with their friends, and one guy's maybe a 10 handicap, maybe the others are a 20 plus handicap. They're going to play and approach things a little bit differently. If they're a little closely matched, then that's one thing. But again, you can't always go by the handicap either, because there's a lot of factors that can be put into that as well. So you really have to understand what your personal abilities are. And Jamie, I think a way to sort of ascertain that is when we practice. Obviously, we need to be out in the golf course in real life situations, but when we're practicing, I think to prepare for things like this, not just putting the ball in a divot or hitting off a hard pan, and those are great things to do, and if you have an option to practice that. But I just think that really going through a good practice session and focusing on, okay, what can I realistically accomplish when I'm out there in the practice tee for, let's say I'm working through my game and I'm spending an hour on the practice tee at various different stations of very different things. I think what I'm really trying to decide here is, okay, what are my abilities and what are some of the areas that I lack confidence in? And walk us through when you're working in some of your schools where you're working through trouble shots and things like that. I would imagine you're working on preparation to help them deal with situations. Give us an idea of some of the things that you do.
Well, in fact, I just taught a golf mastery school last week with Dana Bates, if you know her. We had just a great time. And so one of the things that I like to do in my golf schools or a clinic, whatever, is to get on the golf course. You can set up stations and you can practice, which is really a good thing to do. But once we've practiced some different situations, some of the ones we've talked about, even things like your ball is it's up on the fringe of the green, but it's backed up against the long grass. So you've got you're on the fringe, but you're almost in the longer grass, and that's a tough shot, right? Do you putt it? Your putter gets stuck. You use a hybrid. Can you chip it? Can you do a belly or wedge shot? What do you do? So, there's just so many shots. We were talking about the woods. Sometimes you're on the golf course. You could even be in the fairway, but you've got trees ahead of you or overhanging trees, and you've got to hit a low shot. How do you do that? How do you put it back in your stance and extend that club down the line without, kind of coming to a follow through? So how do you keep it low under trees? Things like that. So, and then what I like to do is to get out on the golf course, and we play scrambles. We just did this last week. So, usually you think about a scramble and in a charity event, something you're trying to win, right? You pick the best shot. You go from best shot to best shot to best shot. In this scramble, the learning trouble shot scramble, you pick sometimes the worst shots, the ones that you need to work on. Or we purposely drop the ball in a difficult place. For some people, a trouble shot is even something like they need to hit a pitch shot over a bunker onto the green and onto a short pin, for example. That's, in some senses, a trouble shot, a more challenging shot than your typical, because you got to hit it maybe a little bit over the water or over the bunker, and you don't have a lot of green to work with. So all these kinds of situations. And just get on the golf course, drop the ball in that situation, have some time. I typically do this at the end of the day when there's not, you're not going to hold the play on the golf course, and be able to hit some different shots. And it's always fun to do it with some different people. Not, it could be just you or you and the professional. And I do recommend that people get take some lessons or have a professional help them with these kinds of shots. You can't exactly figure them out on your own or from YouTube. But you want to practice them, and you have a few people with you. It makes it fun. You can try some. A lot of it's experimentation and really seeing what works. And for the individual, what club or clubs are your go-to clubs? Do you feel most comfortable with in some difficult situations? And get used to that. So for me, it's just fun to actually play a scramble type of some holes. 9 or 3 or 6, whatever it is, and just keep going to the tough shots, all the shots that we're talking about, and work with them. And those also include uphill and downhill and side hill, and where you're not on just flat terrain. It can be fairway bunkers. It can be a fried egg in a bunker, or all the kind of shots that we're afraid of that and don't have that much opportunity, but they come up, and we need to be prepared.
I couldn't agree more.
And I did say the principles, these are always my principles, Ted, and anybody who's heard me, on Coach's Corner or anywhere, I always bring in the martial arts and being centered, being able to keep your centered mentally and physically and emotionally is really important, i.e. don't get freaked out by the situation or get kind of negative, like, oh, I can't do this, oh, this is impossible kind of thing. Everything's possible. And also to really get down in your legs and in your feet and to keep balance. Balance is absolutely crucial. It's crucial throughout the game, but on all of these trouble shots, it's even more crucial. So that's part of the preparation. And as John was saying, looking realistically, what are your options to get to a safe place? What's the distance that you realistically can get to? What's your route to get to it? What's your best club, given the lie? And then make the shot. Use the technique that you have learned to deal with this situation.
Right, and you're exactly right. I think you have to be, you have to go through not just the routine, but you have to be able to focus on some of the different types of shots and practice them. And attitude has a lot to do with it as well. Emotions. A lot of people get in a situation, Jim, where they get overwhelmed by the shot because they haven't really practiced it very much, and a lot of other factors, again, maybe not playing that much golf at all can be overwhelming when you're faced with that. But I think that the underlying thing is that people have to consider and don't really think about, when we see them practicing on the in the practice area, is they're, for the most part, always hitting off perfect lies. And as we all know, as professionals, those are far and few between when you get out on most golf courses, unless you're playing on a perfectly flat golf course, which I don't know of any, at least I don't remember ever playing any. So you have so many different scenarios, and more often than not, some of the scenarios that we talked about, many others, some that Jamie pointed out, Jim, I'm sure you could think of many others too that we haven't covered tonight. it leaves you in a position where the majority of time you're going to be faced with a potentially challenging situation, whether it's the lie, or the circumstances around where your golf ball is in the woods and that sort of thing. But share some final thoughts, if you will. If somebody's out there and really struggling with their game, and particularly in some of these areas that we've touched on tonight, what would be some sort of final thoughts or comments that you would want to advise them if you were standing in front of them on the lesson tee right now? What would you say to them? What would the conversation be? That was for Jim. Jim, I don't know if you got your mic mute.
I'm sorry, I had my mic on mute there. So you were talking about just in general struggling, or they're struggling because they're in all kinds of trouble? I think there's two different approaches here. One, if they're continually getting into trouble, they have to be patient. They just have to be patient and continue to do the things we've discussed tonight, and that is get yourself out of that trouble in one shot, move on, and make the best score you can on that hole. Now, the thing I see happen all the time when a player starts to struggle in their round and they're hitting in different shots that they're not pleased with, so often they immediately go back to, oh, well, did I get this club in the right position here? Did I have my wrist hinged at the right point in my backswing, or did I get the backswing into the right location? They immediately go into the technique, which takes them away from the target, which is what our goal is in this game, is to hit our ball at a target. And if they'll find that they can have some type of routine, that in that routine perhaps is part of their lesson. Maybe their lesson is that they have to swing the arms up and down, and their practice drill is to put their feet together. Let that be part of the routine. But when it's time to hit that golf ball, get into, I want this ball to go at that target. And part of that routine, going back to what we talked about earlier, the steps, what's the lie? What is it allowing me to do? And then what's the picture in front of me that I need to accomplish? And so often players go and they look at the picture, they say, oh, I need to hit this up and over this bunker onto the green. Well, their ball's sitting in a divot, and hitting a high soft shot out of the divot is near impossible. But they try it anyhow, and then they send it into the bunker, they knock it over the green and into the pond on the other side, and now their frustration level goes up. So we have to stay in that process. Can I do this? What's the lie allow me to do? And now how do I move it to a better place than I am right now, giving me a chance to hit a good shot? And try to stay away from swing technique when executing the shot. Swing technique can be a rehearsal swing in the pre-shot routine, but not in the actual execution of the shot.
Again, well said. You know, there's so many factors, I think, guys, that golfers need to really consider, and it really boils down to understanding how to handle yourself when you're out in the golf course. It's very easy to, manipulate things when you're on the practice tee and you're warming up and that sort of thing, because you're typically in ideal situation or circumstances. But once you step onto that first tee and you've hit the ball wherever it may have gone, now all of a sudden real course situations start to come in. And it's very interesting how people handle pressure differently. Some people can, I can think of, from a professional standpoint, I can remember very early on in Tiger's career as an example, where he would hit a poor tee shot and be in a situation where he now had to recover. But he was very calm about it because he had worked on those recovery shots. He'd worked on some of those difficult lies, so that he was able to do that with a very high percentage of regularity of success. And unfortunately, amateurs lack that and they think, well, I don't hit the ball as well as Tiger, or I don't hit the ball as well as so-and-so. And really, that's not a lot of times what the problem is. It's just that the way their thought process is, just as you gave it a good example there, if they've got to hit over a bunker and they're in a divot and they need a high, soft shot, well, that's not the ideal situation to try to implement that. So you need to figure out another strategy, what makes sense, and also what works to your ability. So some great points and great discussion tonight, guys. Hopefully we've helped a few of the listeners out there. I'm going to give each of you an opportunity. Jim, I'll let you go and let the folks know the best way they can reach out for you, and then Jamie.
Well, thank you again, Ted, for having me on the show, and Jamie, it was great to be on the show with you. People can reach me. They can find me on my website at RoyalSt.CloudAcademy.com and email directly at jim@endicottgolf.com. And keep playing this great game and enjoying it out there all. And hopefully I could have a chance to help you sometime.
Well said, and thank you again, always, Jim, for bringing your best. I appreciate that, and enjoyed having you this season on the show. Jamie, what about you? The best way for folks if they want to reach out to you and communicate and see how you can help their game?
People can reach me through my website, thecenteredway.com, THE centered, ED, thecenteredway.com, Jamie, JAMIE at thecenteredway.com, and also on Facebook or LinkedIn, Jamie Leno Zimron, Leno like Jay Leno, Jamie Leno Zimron. And also, I like to talk to people, so phone is good, 760-492-4653, 760-492-GOLF. And I love to hear from people, and it's exciting to see people, make some real, true game improvements. And I hope, Ted, maybe sometime we can talk a little bit more about what we like to call scoring tees, which can help you not get in so much trouble. And, some people are just out there for the adventure. And, they're just like, whatever happens, and they're just like, woo, and, kind of getting their money's worth, and they get some good laughs. I think we all have to be ready to laugh on the golf course in the situations that we get in and how we do or don't get out of them. You have to have a sense of humor. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. You have to be willing to, look at the situation, not just on the course, but of the day. Are you there just to have some fun that day, or you're in a more serious mode where it's a tournament involved, where your score matters a little bit more? Obviously, it matters all the time, but there are some situations, but you always have to remember to have fun. That's what the game is about. It's a game after all, and if you're taking yourself too seriously all the time, you're not going to enjoy yourself, and more than likely not going to want to stick with it. So it can be a tough game, but as both of you have mentioned, get out there and get some lessons. Find yourself a good professional, whether it be a PGA or LPGA professional in your area, and connect with them and work out a plan to help improve your game. But guys, thank you very, very much. I hope both of you had a great 4th of July holiday weekend, and that much continued success, and look forward to having you guys back on the Coach's Corner panel. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you both.
Thank you,
Ted, and have a nice vacation. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. That was Jim Endicott and Jamie Leno Zimron joining me on the Coach's Corner panel. For the first time, each of them were on together, so it was a great discussion talking about some of the trouble shots and recovery shots, if you will, that you may be faced with out in the golf course. As I get ready to welcome my very special guest this evening is the CEO of Power Tee, Martin Wyeth. I'm going to take a quick break, and we'll listen to a message from Golf Tips Magazine.
The following ad is sponsored by Golf Tips Magazine.
Are you tired of being short off the tee? And what about those 3 putts? Forget about it. It's time you got serious about your game. Golf Tips, the most in-depth magazine in the industry. For over 30 years, Golf Tips has delivered expert content such as the latest golf instruction from America's top pros, simple to follow practice and game improvement drills, fitness and mental game tips, equipment, training aids, accessory and apparel reviews, golf destinations and travel tips for every budget, and so much more. Don't miss a single issue. Go to golftipsmag.com and subscribe today.
All right, welcome back, everybody. And as I get ready to welcome my very special guest this evening. We're just waiting for him to call in, and I will introduce him here shortly. But let me just remind everybody, of course, I am live every Thursday evening from 6 to 8 p.m. Central here on the blogtalkradio.com network. And, excuse me, best way to find us is to go to blogtalkradio.com/Golf Talk Live, and that will take you to the main page. And during the live broadcast, of course, I'll be front and center right there. You'll see that we're during a live broadcast. But for some reason, if you're not able to tune in live or you're coming late to the program and you want to hear some of the portion that you've missed, you can go to blogtalkradio.com/Golf Talk Live and scroll down to the on-demand section. And all of the shows, as I mentioned, are live, but they are also auto-recorded, so you can listen to the recorded version there. Or you can just listen to the recorded version on a number of different popular podcast sites that you can visit. Spotify and iTunes are some of the top ones out there, Castbox, and many others. In the closing intro or exit from the show, we'll tell you some more places that you can go and listen to this program as well. But I see that my guest is online here, so let me just read a little bit about him, and then I'll bring him on. My very special guest is the founder and CEO of Power Tea, Martin Wyeth. He grew up in Cheddar, England. A very interesting backstory. The town, of course, where cheddar cheese was invented. In fact, he made cheddar cheese as a kid, one of his childhood jobs. We'll have to ask him about that a little bit. And even though he played certainly golf a handful of times as a youngster, he didn't really take up the game properly until he was in his 20s. His father traveled quite a bit of the time as an insurance salesperson for Prudential, and he also went to the University of Liverpool, but he graduated from the University of East Anglia. So we're going to talk to him about Power Tea, but we're going to talk to him some other things as well. So please welcome tonight's very special guest, Martin Wyeth. Good evening, Martin, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Ted. It's a pleasure to be on.
My pleasure to have you. I have to ask you the obvious. Tell me a little bit about cheddar cheese. I did not know that that's where it was from. One of my favorite cheeses. I got to ask you before we get into our golf discussion. Tell me a little bit about that experience.
So cool. Well, cheddar cheese it was invented in Cheddar because of the Cheddar Caves. So they were a nice, cool place to store dairy products and keep them for a long time. And the cheddar gets its name, or I don't know which came first, but the process of cheddaring cheese is what basically turns milk into that wonderful cheese.
Now, did you actually make the cheese yourself, or what was the process that you were involved with?
Sure, yeah. So we there was back in the day before regulations of food manufacturer regulations had sort of squeezed the small producer out. We had a vat. Oh my goodness, it was 25, 30 feet long by memory, about 4 feet wide, 4 feet deep. And every morning there would be a delivery of whey. We'd heat that up, so they pumped steam around the vat was stainless steel. They pumped the steam on milk. It was delivery of whole milk, obviously, and then in the process of heating it up, the whey would separate out, leaving curds underneath. So the milk would effectively separate. They drained the whey off, and then you end up with this sort of white. It's called curds. Carpet on the bottom of the vat that got cut up with a knife that looked a bit like Freddy Krueger's hand. You'd walk up and down with this knife, cutting the whey into thin strips. Then you salt it, and then we mixed it. I think it was mixed. I think there was a machine got involved in the mixing. I don't think it was all by hand. These were said, for a manual process that you were shifting a fair amount of weight of material. Right. Once that was done, it got, you'd ladle out an amount into a mold. You'd line the mold with gauze, ladle the curds in, and then close the gauze over the top, and it would go into a big hand-operated press. where you turn the wheel at the top, squeeze the way out. And this was all done as a sort of spectacle for visiting tourists. So you were sort of part of it was part act and part production. And then the cheeses would go off into a curing room where they got turned every day, and the good ones got kept there for 3 or 4 years.
Wow. I had to ask, Martin, because it was such an interesting story, and especially for a youngster at that time to be involved in that process had to be kind of exciting. So I couldn't, forgive me, but I couldn't resist asking you as the first question.
Thank you. It's a long time since I've thought about that job. I can't even remember how old I was, but probably I'm going to say somewhere between 12 and 16, I would guess.
Well, very interesting. Yeah. I've never met anybody that did that as a youngster, and obviously it had to be a very interesting process. And like you said, a little bit of a job, but also for show as well for those bystanders watching the process. Definitely something interesting for a youngster growing up. So I want to talk. Obviously, we're going to talk about power tee, but I want to sort of set this up a little bit differently than most conversations about golf, because one of the areas, and I've hit off, regular turf, and I've hit off mats, and I'll be the first to admit that hitting off a lot of the artificial turfs and that is not a pleasurable experience for a lot of folks. But you guys have developed a system, and I want you to talk about some of the pitfalls of what typically has been out there on the market and why power tee has become so popular, and particularly what about the design of the power tee units that makes them a much more enjoyable experience versus some of the more traditional mats. So talk about traditionally, so that people have an understanding what we're talking about, some of the traditional mats, and then how power tee sort of fits into this.
Thanks, Ted. That's a really good place to start. We're all about bringing the ball back to the golfer and allowing them to stay focused and stay still and calm over the ball, without distraction. But ultimately, as you say, mats have an incredibly bad rap, and certainly it was Jim Furyk's probably number one concern when we met him. So I think, I could go on a long time about mats, but we use 2 mats. We use one mat where the ball comes up, which is a fibrous material. It's manufactured by a company in Canada called Fiberbuilt. And it's basically long strands of crimped nylon, an inch and a half long. And so it's sort of where the ball comes up, the ball is sort of suspended on top of these. It's like if you can imagine having dozens of brushes side by side, the ball's sitting up on the bristles. Now, typically, low handicap golfers don't like surface because the ball sits up. It's a bit like playing off a Soiser. You get, and a lot of guys who like to hit down on the ball, when they play off a Soiser, will hit the ball high in the face. And if I practice off the Fiberbuilt, I tend to hit the ball high in the face. But we also have another mat adjacent to where the ball comes up, so that if you're hitting short irons or mid irons or approach shots and you want to get some feel, it's a specially formulated mat that we designed. You get no sticking of mess to the back of the golf club, and we have an enormous amount of shock resisting foam underneath the mat, so you can hit down really hard. You can sort of put all your weight on your left side if you're a right-hander, load up, strike hard down on the ball with a wedge. In fact, when I've got a low handicap golfer who doesn't like mats, that's the first thing I ask them to do. So, move the ball to the back of your stance, hit down really hard on it, hit down so hard you feel like you're going to hurt yourself. And they do it, and the look on their face when they complete the shot is it's very rewarding. It's such a great feeling surface. And it's really the number one endorsement that we get from Jim. He loves hitting off our mats. Jim, funnily enough, is the one that likes to hit off the fiber belt. He's a picker, he describes himself as. So he likes to hit off the fiber belt. He's got one in his backyard. He hits thousands of balls off it when he's at home. But really, what's the derivative of this thing? The mats you're talking about generally are at country clubs or golf courses, and they've been engineered to look nice. So they're a long, continuous strip. Generally speaking, they're some kind of polypropylene mix. When you hit down on them, you actually melt the fibers. That's why you get the green stuff on the back of your club. And what you're feeling a lot of the time when you get that shock is not, you're not bottoming out with the club. The club is actually sticking to the polypropylene, which is sending a shock wave up the shaft of the club. Now, if you hit anyone who hits a lot of balls off of that is going to hurt themselves. It's only a matter of time. You've either got to change your swing to not hit down on the ball, or you're going to hurt yourself. So, so where clubs are at the moment, a lot of clubs, they're sort of between a rock and a hard place, because when the weather's bad, the grass is not growing, the tee line gets worn out, whether the weather's good or bad. By the end of the day, there's no grass left. So their alternative, you've either got to hit out a really bad chewed up grass, or you've got to hit off a mat that's going to teach you not to hit down on the ball or hurt yourself.
Right.
So we're a really, really good, clubs, we're a really good augmentation to grass. If you look at habits of golfers, the number one time that a golfer wants to go out and hit a bucket of balls, other than the warm-up bucket before playing, is afternoon and evening. And I know from going to my club that if you go down there any time after 2 o'clock, there's no grass left. So they can be in the same situation where there's just really, really bad grass, or you've got to hit off of rock hard mats. And so when you put power tee in, what we recommend people do is, run the grass when the grass is sensible, up to midday or slightly beyond. But then really when you're getting down to destroying the last ounce of root structure and really making it hard to bring that grass back, move back onto the power tees. And then those power tees can deliver balls and a really good practice experience all the way out till sundown. So where we've done this for clubs, the range engagement has just literally gone through the roof. So instead of the range being absolutely deserted after 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, just a few very low handicap guys grinding it out. When we've done power tee at the back, the range has actually become a destination, and it can be packed all the way out to sundown. It's just so much more enjoyable to hit off a power tee. And of course, you're providing that facility when people want it, which is afternoons and evenings.
Right, exactly. And, you raise a really interesting point, too. I just want to touch on one more thing. With traditional mats, I've hit, gone up to a range, a local, range center, practice center, driving range, and that will have sort of the older versions, if you will, of the traditional mats. And you're exactly right. They're not comfortable at all to hit off of. Over time, they flatten out. There's wear marks in the mat itself. So when you're standing there, one foot's a little lower than the other, and forget about the hitting area. So they're one of two things, depending on the center and who's running it. They're either changing them out a lot, but more often than not, they aren't doing that. But the other issue too is that you're not getting an accurate strike because, as you said, because it is an uncomfortable experience hitting, trying to hit down. In fact, you can't really hit down. You almost have to sweep the ball off because hitting down, a lot of times they're setting it on top of concrete. So you're getting that shock. It's not absorbing the shock very well, and it can hurt. And traditionally, that's what turned a lot of people off. But I like what you're talking about here, and obviously through your own club's experience and others, a lot of venues are benefiting from having Power T units. So talk about some of the successes, if you wouldn't, Mill, and what's the difference, or how do you the installations differ at a golf course versus maybe a practice center or driving range? But talk about a little bit about some of the successes that you've had and why.
I will, thanks, Ted. And just a very brief point that you prompted me on is we lease our equipment. So as a matter of course, we replace the mats every 20 months. So our mats never get old, they never get compressed, they never get tired. You never get into that situation that you're talking about with traditional mats. So going on to venues, we're at St Andrews. We've been working with St Andrews for 20 years. If you hook the ball good and hard, you're on the road hole. We're at Wentworth, the Belfry, Dromoland Castle, Celtic Manor, the 2010 Ryder Cup destination of Power T. They're all basically putting Power T in because it represents the best you can have. It really is the most enjoyable practice experience you can give to a golfer, bar none. There really is nothing out there that's going to help the golfer more than Power T to find a good rhythm, stay in a good spot, and finish their practice session confident and refreshed. And that's great, if you're St Andrews, or if you've got an unlimited budget, Celtic Manor, the range revenue there is meaningless to them. It was the same at Wentworth. You were paying $1,000 to play the West Course, and you got a Power T to warm up on. But for the for the rest of us, where we have to balance the books, Power T is it's a revenue generator. It encourages a much broader demographic of golfer to come to the facility. So the analogy that resonates with most people who understand golf is if you get someone who's interested in the game, they sort of rattle around in the garage, find their grandfather's 7-iron with a bladed club head and a stiff shaft, and they take it down to the local grass tee line and start, playing it down in the afternoon. They're probably, with the best will in the world, unless they're very naturally talented indeed, they're probably going to get about 1 in 20, 1 in 30 balls in the air. Now, if you take that same beginner and you put them on a Power Tee, obviously they address the ball. They'll usually hit it off the tee where the ball comes up. They won't drag it onto the standing mat. Now, if that golfer swings over the top and just clips the top of the ball, he knows he's done that. The ball sort of scuttles off and finishes up 10 feet away. But he knows that with his next swing, he has to stay down. He knows he's come up because he knows he hit the top of the ball. So on the next swing, without changing anything, he stays down. Now, maybe he toes it with the next shot, but he knows he toes it because the club twisted open in his hand. So he'll step into the ball a little bit. And what you'll see, and this is with all levels of golfer, right down to the, to the 5 handicap level, is that people find the middle of the club face a lot quicker. And when they found it, they tend to be able to hold it for the whole practice session. And it's a huge confidence builder. It makes the whole, you take the guy who's, hit 2 out of 50 in the air, how likely is he to come back to the facility or even engage with golf compared to if he hits off a Power Tee and he gets 30 out of 50 in the air and hits a couple of really good shots. The engagement factor with Power Tee is literally off the charts. So, really, we're a tool in so many ways. Power Tee is a tool. It's a tool to grow your business. It's a tool to improve your game. It's a tool to, get your reps in. And if you use that tool well, it's going to serve you well. But it really depends on who you are, what you're looking out for it. But, there really isn't a practice environment that we don't augment. And it all falls through to the bottom line. We had a customer in Austin, Texas, who put in $1 million worth of power tees, 90 machines across 3 sites. And the following month, after we installed, it was over 100 degrees every day, went into 105. And his golf course got slaughtered. Play was down 20 or 30%. At the same time, the driving range revenue was up by 10 to 15%. So even with these record temperatures, the differential between lost golf course and increased range is something like 45%. And that's all driven by, people enjoying themselves. So it's a pretty cool way to make a living. We're just helping people have fun.
Well, and that's a great point, Martin, because, as a golf professional, a teach professional, one of the problems that I see looking up and down the range, and I'm talking about a typical driving range where they don't have the power tee, is number one, there's all kinds of, divots by the end of the day, and it's a greenskeeper's nightmare, to go out and fix all that, and it takes a long time, and some facilities that have a lot of flexibility to move the hitting area around or multiple levels, can get away with a little bit more, but some of the smaller facilities that don't, it's a lot of damage. And one of the things that I like to see as a professional is I want to see people out there working on their game. And, obviously there's a difference between, a warm-up session. But what I like about what you guys are talking about here is not just making it a more enjoyable, because it is a game after all. Golf is a game, and you want people to go out and have fun. But it's developed into a great revenue source for a lot of, facilities, because it's keeping people out there. And when people stay at the golf course and they're working on their game and they're having fun and they're excited about their game, then they're going to do other things as well. They're going to go into the pro shop a little more often. Maybe they're going to get some, more beverages as the day goes on. Whatever the case is, they're likely going to stick around a lot more because they're having fun. And that's really what from the golf manager's perspective or the management team at a golf course, that's what you're looking for, is you're looking for that revenue, not just out on the golf course, but also within the facility as well. And if the longer people stay there, the more and are excited about staying there, the more that's going to happen. I want to ask you, speaking of professionals, because I noticed in some of the notes that you guys have done, you've been collaborating with Rick Smith, who of course is a well-known golf professional. What has been some of his perspective on this, and what are his thoughts? And I know that he's working with a number of golfers of all skill levels, including pros, using power tee. What has been some of his feedback?
Well, his number one point was the same as Furitz. He loves the mats. He really doesn't like the classic country club mat. They're just wrist breakers. They're jarring. They're terrible. Now, obviously, he teaches a lot of very, very high caliber golfers, which golf is a very odd industry. It tends to be run by people who tried to or played it at some level competitively and tend to have got down to scratch. And as such, it sort of innately tries to market itself to low handicap golfers. And so I often walk into guys' businesses and they're just throwing everything they've got at winning the low handicap golfers. And they're not looking at it from a business perspective where, right. 70, 80, 90% of your revenue is coming from, people who just want to go out, by the time they're on the fourth hole, they're on their fifth beer. Now, there's some people who can play golf like that. I'm sadly not one of them. Me neither. They're not there to shoot a number. They're there right. to blow off steam, to have a laugh with their mates. If they hit a couple of good shots, great. And now that's where That's where a lot of your money's coming from. And even more ridiculously, if golf wants to grow, above and beyond the COVID boom that we've all enjoyed,
Right.
your growth area is non-golfers. So how do you get a non-golfer having fun, with a golf club in their hand? And of course, top golfers really crack that to a large degree. You give them a great, comfortable environment. And then there's not a blade of grass anywhere in sight in top golf. But sort of rewinding back to Rick, so he loves the mats. We're working with him. He's doing some analysis on how well people hit the ball on power tee versus grass. And one of the things we're really interested in is trying to understand on warm-up. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Jack Nicklaus, when he was warming up at his, in his heyday, he teed everything up on the range. He teed up his wedges. He teed up his 9, 8, 7, 6 iron. He teed everything up. He played nothing down on the range. Now, agronomy was much more primitive back then. The courses weren't as sharp as they are now. So you could argue that he had to do that because the condition of the range maybe wasn't so good. But then, his next part of his routine was to go and sink 2 or 3 foot putts. Now, he was the best putter of his day, arguably. So why is he only thinking 2 or 3 foot putts? And this has been very well documented. If you ever asked him that question, he wasn't too kind to you. He'd say, well, dummy, I want to go to the golf course with an image of the ball disappearing in the hole. I don't want to go to the golf course having just lipped them out. So what he was doing was building confidence before he went out and played. And this really is my prime bugbear with clubs. If you're going to go out and play in the afternoon, you're standing there, the grass is absolutely destroyed. You're trying to prop the ball up on a bit of remaining grass between a host of other divots. Your feet are in divots, so you're not getting any traction with your spikes. Once the top layer is gone, you're slipping around. Your feet are not level with the ball if you're standing in divots. So if you don't compensate by gripping down the club, you're going to hit it flat, and you might not notice that. So that's going to be a real confidence destroyer. Once you've gripped it down, you're going to change your yardage, so the number you get back where the ball lands is not accurate feedback. So, and Furyk's absolute. Both Furyk and Hogan were renowned, or Furyk is renowned. He won't hit out of a bad lie. If the range is chewed up, he's got to warm up. He'll hit half a dozen wedges just to, turn his hand over, and then he'll go and putt. He's not going to hit out of a bad lie, and nor would Hogan. So clubs all over the country are really stuck when it comes to afternoon golf, because you've got to either hit it out of the divots, and I'm certain if you're a pro golfer, you will have seen Tiger tee off last time he played at St Andrews, and I was certainly very excited the way he hit that drive, and then lo and behold, it lands in a divot 105 yards out, whatever it was. Now, even though he was recovering from his injuries, et cetera, that's a real bread and butter shot. Tiger would have put that, 3 feet past the hole and given himself a good birdie putt. What happened? He's playing out of a divot and hits it in the berm and, destroys any chance of momentum on his second shot because of a bad lie. So why we force our country club golfers to practice out of that stuff is absolutely beyond me when there's a better alternative around.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. I mean, we've all been in that situation. Again, if you're out a little earlier in the day, in the morning, it's like on the golf course. When you're playing an earlier round, the golf course is in a little better shape. As it, the day progresses, depending on where you are, it's drying out a little bit. You've got 1,000 people walking along it, and the greens are not as, as true as they were earlier in the day. So there's a lot of factors, and so it should be no different on the practice tee as well. I want to get you to just talk a little bit about, I know you kind of glossed over it, but I want to maybe get into a little bit more detail. What I found really interesting is we've been talking about the mat, but there's another component to this. You also have, along with the mat, is an auto tee system that offers 40 different tee heights. Talk a little bit about that, because that's something as well that's a great feature that goes along with this.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the nub of what we do. The mats are really important, without question. But the whole concept of power tee is that you can stay in position between shots if you want to. So it enables you to do a whole ton of things that you just can't do in a conventional setting. And, one of them that, if you get stuck and you can't hit the ball for whatever reason, you know how frustrating that is. You've got absolutely nothing. One of the really nice things you can do with power tee is just take a really neutral setup to the ball, put the ball on its lowest tee height, get the club behind it, and just chip it. Chip it 20 feet with a wide backswing, wide follow through, and then do it again, and then do it again. And each time you finish, you hold your finish, the ball comes back up, you come back to the ball and do it again. And then what you can do with power tee, because you're not letting go of the club, because you're not moving your feet, you can start to lengthen your swing. And the moment you lose the center of the club face, you come back down. If you find the center, you extend your swing. So you can very, very rapidly find the middle of the club face. Once you've got that, you can start to feel your golf swing, and you can bring yourself back from despair fairly quickly. And that concept of being able to hold your position between shots, one of the things Furyk did for us when he joined the team was he said you need alignment lines on the mats. Well, we couldn't actually print on the mats because our mats get so much wear. Anything you print on them just looks terrible within a month. So we designed this series of elasticated strings that can you can set your toes against them. So rather than using a tour stick where if you catch it with your toe it moves, you've got to keep joggling it back into position. You stretch these strings across your mat, they mark where your toe position is. So that keeps your alignment. And then we have a few discs that you can place on your swing path and show you where to align your face. So if you want to hit a cut, you hold the face open. You want to hit a draw, you hold the face closed. And so by placing these alignment strings and markers, we can get the golfer to really stay in position and focus on other things. Focus on release timing, focus on how you start the downswing, focus on, whatever your coach has told you need to work on. You can just focus in very closely on that one attribute. And because nothing is changing between swings, the ball is always clean, the club is always clean, the grooves are always clean. The result that you get when you strike that ball is a true result. So often when you're practicing out of a bad lie, you put a good swing on the ball, it felt good, it was a good swing, but you get a really bad result. And we all know, if you catch the ball very slightly heavy in a bunker, it goes nowhere. Just the slightest amount of contamination between the club and the ball can really have a very dramatic effect on ball flight. So when you're in that practice mode, not the playing mode, you don't want those variations. We all understand they're a part of the game, but if you're trying to figure something out, let's say you're trying to flight the ball. So what you're interested in is what kind of spin you're putting on the ball. What power tee does by enabling you to stay stable is to really work on that, release timing or swing path, however you're trying to put the spin on, and you're going to get a true result because the club's clean and the ball's clean. Even if you hit it a little bit heavy, we do artificially improve the shot that you hit because you don't get that poor contact, but you know you've hit it heavy. You can hear it and you can feel it. So, you know, even for very, very low handicap golfers, depending on what you're working on, it's an insanely good way to improve.
You know, and that's what golfers are looking for is they want to, you know, I mean, when I talk to most amateur golfers, one of the biggest things that they hate is spending much time up at the range, working on their game. They'll go out and they'll hit a few balls, and I'm not talking about a warm-up session. I'm talking about a practice session, you know, where they're 30 minutes to an hour, you know, even with their coach. And, you know, if it's not an enjoyable experience, they're not going to stick with it, or they're going to rush through the process. And I really like what you've had to say about how not only are they improving the experience with Power Tee, but they're also still getting the good feedback that they need, which is important as a golfer. I mean, you want to get that good feedback, and you're able to do that. And there's nothing more frustrating than going to the range, you know, as I mentioned earlier, and you're hitting either off very poor quality mats or a green area that has been beaten to death, and just, you know, reused over the summer, and not really having a good experience. Stay very long. I mean, very seldomly when I go to a range do I see people staying there for any length of time. Again, obviously with the warm-up session, that's a little bit different. Understandably, they're not going to be out there for an hour if they're getting ready to tee it up. But, you know, people that are just out there on a weekend that just want to practice a little bit that maybe aren't playing, you know, they'll go out there and they'll hit a bunch of balls, but you can just tell they're just raking and hitting it. They're not getting really any enjoyment, and they're not really getting a lot of feedback because, as you pointed out, they're standing in divots or they're standing in uneven lies, and they're just not getting a good experience. And again, as you pointed out, you have to practice those things too. But when you're just out there and you're wanting to work and hitting and making good solid contact, you want to be doing it in ideal conditions as you would off the tee. So a lot of great points that you've made. And you mentioned too, you know, obviously Jim Furyk is an ambassador and obviously believes in Power Tee, and obviously uses it. So this is not something just for country clubs and you know, driving practice centers or driving ranges. This is something that people can get at home as well, correct?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. You know, Duffner's got one. Rob Roxett got one in the UK. Who was it who won the Open when Vanderbilt? It's Paul Lawrie. He has one. Tony Robbins has got a couple of them. So, and all our home use guys, they absolutely love them. And you know, funnily enough, the family engages over them. You know, we hear it every time. My wife likes hitting balls off it. My kids are now interested in golf. Right. You know, ultimately it's a lot of fun to hit a great golf shot. And when we were talking earlier, you know, about engagement and so on and so forth, really the nub of it for the golf industry is what makes a golfer. What turns someone who's, you know, on his fifth beer after 4 holes and just having a lark into someone who wants to improve, who gets down to 15, gets down to 12, gets down to 8, and then really, you know, then you've got a big decision to make for most of us, I guess, as to whether you're going to put in the work to get down to scratch. What is it that hooks that person? And in my view, it's very simple. It's hitting good shots. There's very little, you know, in sport that gives you the thrill of when you catch a 3-wood absolutely crisp, and you see that ball, you know, at all levels when you first begin. You know, if you catch it, you're going to see that ball take off faster than you imagined possible. And that's what, you know, ultimately what gets people hurt. And we're a big part of that equation.
Yeah. And again, you want to make it, you know, golf is supposed to be fun. And unfortunately for some, it's not. And there are a number of factors, obviously. As we both know, it's a challenging game. it can be difficult for some to understand and improve on the game. But a big component of that is the fact that it's not fun for them. If the experience is not fun, and you raised a really interesting point that I want to sort of capitalize on. We've all in the golf industry certainly have benefited, and I say this unfortunately, through the mishaps of COVID. The golf industry has certainly seen a big uptick of new people coming to the game. Forget about the people that have been playing this game for a long time, but a lot of new people coming to the game. And the number one thing that they're looking for is they want to have fun. It's a new experience from them. Many of them have never played this game before. They didn't grow up as maybe some of us did in a family where, your father took you out to the range when you were a youngster or an uncle or a grandfather or what have you. There are many younger folks that have never had that opportunity or never had that exposure. And the last thing they want to do is go out there and not have a good experience. And you mentioned some facilities like Top Golf and others that are helping to spur that interest. But again, your product, Power Tee, gives them a great opportunity to have some fun and improve in the game and want to stick with it even longer. And that's a big plus, as you pointed out, for golf courses and driving ranges, because that's one of the things they want people to stay out, is they want people to stay at their facility longer and see, higher revenues, not just out on the golf course. Obviously, that's a big component, but they want to see them accessing other options. And, a lot of times as I'm sure you can witness too, and when they don't have your product, as the driving ranges are dead, right?
Oh, totally. And they deserve to be, because neither surface is worth hitting off of. So you imagine how much busier the bar would be if you had a decent surface to hit off in the afternoon and evening, and the members would be down in their droves over and above the traditional rock hard mat versus chewed up tee line. So that enormous chunk of real estate, which is usually adjacent to the clubhouse, is basically a completely dead duck from about 3 o'clock till close. And what it should be is a center of engagement for teaching, a family center of engagement. You roll out the beverage cart out there 2 or 3 nights a week, and really, fuel the heart of the club. Instead, it's just dead. It's a really sad oversight by, far too many clubs. But going back to the COVID point, the golf industry now has this sort of gift, which, as you say, came about through very, challenging circumstances. But its job now is to retain those people and to make the experience good, and to get them performing on the golf course, get them having fun, and it's products like Power Tee that are going to do that.
And also, let's not forget, as you touched on a little bit, is the greenskeeping crew and that at the golf course. They've got enough to deal with out there, keeping the greens and the fairways and whatnot, up to snuff. But another challenge for them is the cost of keeping the range in good shape as well. And I would imagine, though, obviously there's going to be an initial investment to change over to Power Tee, but again, with some of the things that we talked about, they're going to see revenues coming up, and those costs are going to be very quickly replenished, and those expenses rather are going to be very quickly replenished, and saved, not having to spend money, fixing up the tee box all the time, or the driving range.
There's no cost to putting Power Tee in. It's all done on lease, so there's no upfront capital cost at all. It's straight in, and really, if you for a club that has 500 or 600 members, the cost to each member of having Power Tee at the club is less than $1 a week. Wow. So to put a Power Tee fee on the membership, we've had guys do it. They've they put on a $5 a week power tee fee. And, provided you get the power tees in the right place and you make them available, on a daily basis, then we recommend very strongly that you you close the range at midday. And then what you end up with is much higher quality grass when you are using grass, and you get a great practice experience for the rest of the day. And that's all for $1 a week for the membership. And, if $1 a week now in today's money, it really isn't a lot of cash.
No, not at all.
Transform your facility. And if I were, I know that clubs come under a lot of pressure from the low handicappers. They hate mats, and they don't understand power tee because they never played off it. So they, we don't want that here, and you want to keep your low handicappers happy. But ultimately speaking, I think if you run a facility with power tee, you run it well. I would defend the grass and make sure that, for big events like your member guest, your member, you're playing out of something that really does resemble the fairway. You've rested it long enough that all those old divots have healed up. You've rolled it so it's flat and level. And when you hit off it, you're really hitting off something that's worth hitting off of. Because even when it's grown in and you're actually playing off grass, if you actually stand there and close your eyes and sort of feel what's going on under your feet, the divots are still there. They've just got grass in them. And that's even at some very high-end clubs. So you can go on.
No, I was just going to say, just going to your point about, some of the higher handicap golfers that may be apprehensive about wanting to play on power. Once they come into a facility and they see the others, practicing on them, surprising, I would imagine, how many people would be converted and saying, hey, maybe it's not so bad after all. I think it's like anything, you got to give it a try first before you sort of thumb your nose at something. But I really like the concept behind this. I did a lot of research before we did the show tonight on your website, and there's a lot of great information. And I want to give that out now for the listeners, and that is powertee.com. Is the website you can go to, and all of the information and much more than what we were talking about tonight. We just gave you a little snippet of some of the things, but it talks to you a little bit more about what is power tee and how you can get power tee for whether you're running a country club or a driving range or even for home use. And there's some great videos on there as well, and you can hear some great feedback from individuals like PGA professional Jim Furyk and obviously teacher professional Rick Smith as well. Some great images there of people. And I see that you have on one of the blog posts you had a great image using one of your products was Gina Rojas, who is affectionately known as with the left arm adaptive golfer. She's been on the show a number of times. Yeah, and she's getting to use that as well. So a lot of great stuff there. Definitely suggest that after the program that everybody heads over to powertee.com and checks out some of the great information there. But Martin, I want to thank you very much for coming on and sharing this information with my audience tonight. Much continued success with Power Tee. I have no doubt as it's getting into more and more facilities. How many? I know you've got literally hundreds of places now that Power Tee is getting into, and more I'm sure on the way. Is when it comes to installing it at a course, how long of a turnaround from when you put it in is it up and running?
So we have at the moment we're putting a lot of machines in on a deck. So rather than sort of trying to make the product look like a traditional tee line, we're putting in a composite deck, which looks really cool. And we can actually pre-build them in the factory, so we can have 20 machines installed in a day.
Wow.
And you sort of go home. You go home one evening, and you come in the next evening, and you got Power Tee. And if you want a slightly lower profile install where you want it set into the ground, it can take as much as a week to install 20 machines. But yeah, we've been doing this a while. We're pretty skilled at it, and it's just such a wonderful way to practice. And you mentioned beginners might enjoy it. There's no question. We've talked a lot about low handicap benefits, which are really, you've got to be right there. You've got to understand swing dynamics. You've got to understand a lot of things before you start drilling in to those finer points with Power Tee. The benefit of Power Tee is at its peak with beginners and high handicap. They don't have the discipline to go through a pre-shot routine. They can't get back in to the same position after playing a good shot. So Power Tee really accelerates those guys the fastest. And then obviously when you really get down to the nub of it and you're trying to go from +3 to +5, then you better hang out around the chipping green, because that's where it happens, putting and chipping.
Right. Right. Exactly.
But and then we're not a part of that.
Well, and that's why you're getting great endorsements from folks like Rick Smith and Ambassador Jim Furyk, is obviously they know the ins and outs of the game, and they obviously understand the benefits that Power Tee has to offer. But great product, and again go ahead.
Thanks. Really excited about Rick Smith. We're doing some studies on the psychological benefits of, walking to the first tee having hit 50 good shots as opposed to walking there having, hit 30 good shots and 20 bad shots. And I think that's going to be some pretty exciting data comes out of that.
Well, and that's what you want to be able to show them, is show them the numbers, what the benefits of it, and that's where people will be more inclined to want to give it the old college try, as it were, for those that have never used it before. But Martin, I want to thank you very much for joining me again on Golf Talk Live. I really appreciate, and I found it a very interesting discussion, and thank you for sharing that. And again, to the listeners, if you go to powertee.com, you can get all the information there, some great videos and some great information on that. And all of their contact information is available off the website too, if you want to reach out. If you're the manager at a golf club or driving range and you want to reach out and get more information, I'm sure they'll be happy to help organize some things with you. But Martin, again, thank you very much for spending some time with me tonight on Golf Talk Live.
Thanks, Ted. It's been an absolute pleasure. Look forward to catching up with you again soon.
I will too. I'd love to have you back anytime. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your week and great weekend, and much continued success with Power Tee.
Thanks, Ted. Good night.
All right. Bye-bye. All right, that was Martin Wyeth, CEO of Power Tee, joining me for a great discussion tonight on a really interesting product. And again, I would strongly urge the listeners to go to powertee.com to get more information. It's obviously spreading fast, and as I also mentioned, a number of very prominent professionals, Rick Smith being a top-notch golf instructor, and obviously Jim Furyk, well-known on the links, as it were, on the PGA Tour, definitely endorsing and being ambassadors of this great product. So definitely you want to check that out at powertee.com. On that note, as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, there'll be no shows next week. I'll be off on vacation, so we will return for both shows, the Women of Golf and Golf Talk Live, the following week. So again, no shows next week. But in the meantime, if you want to go back and listen to tonight's show in its entirety, if you're just tuning in a little bit later in the broadcast, you can go to blogtalkradio.com/Golf Talk Live or Women of Golf. For those of you who want to listen to the women's program, scroll down to off the main page to the on-demand sections, and you can listen to the shows in their entirety of the recorded version. So it goes all the way back to the beginning. But on that note, everybody have a great rest of your week and great weekend. God bless, and we'll see you next time right here on Golf Talk Live.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this week's broadcast of Golf Talk Live. We'd like to thank this week's Coach's Corner panel, and a special thank you to tonight's guest. Remember to join Ted every Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. Central on Golf Talk Live. And be sure to follow Ted on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you're interested in being a guest on Golf Talk Live, send Ted an email at ted.golftalklive@gmail.com. This has been a production of the iGolf Sports Network.